Well, hello everybody. This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tank. And I have a guest just joining me, Randy Wilburn, who actually is involved with quite a few projects that I've been following for a while, and I really love the publications. One of which is called Encourage, Build, Grow, and it's his private project, a podcast, as well as a consultancy firm. I'm guessing consultancy services, helping people become better leaders and generally become better. But he also is running the Zweig Group's podcast called the Zweig Letter Podcast, at which I've actually been interviewed recently. If you had a chance to listen to that episode, you can still find a link, a connection to it on my LinkedIn profile and also on my website, sarahcolata.com. And yeah, Randy is basically running this podcast. He's very passionate about podcasting. So I invited him today to talk a little bit about personal growth, about helping architects, and also about podcasting. Randy, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It is a pleasure to be with you. I am so honored that you returned the favor. You joined me for a podcast, and now I'm getting to join you. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it was indeed a favor, but I think you did me a bigger favor by inviting me to your podcast.
It's all good. It's all good. So
But nevertheless, it's actually a huge honor because I love what you're doing and I love all the things that you stand for, and we'll get a little bit of an insight into your world at this episode. So that's exciting. So Randy, maybe let's start with just a little bit about yourself. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you kind of come about podcasting and creating all this amazing content?
absolutely, absolutely. So I'm not going to go back to when I was born, but I will start. I graduated from Howard University, which is a historically black college here in the United States. I went off to. I heeded the advice that so many shared with the pioneers when they said, "Go west, young man. Go west, young woman." And I went out to California and ran a business out there for a couple of years, and then came back to the East Coast. Spent some time in Washington D.C. again, and then I ended up in Boston. And in Boston is where I got my first introduction to the design industry. I joined a company at the time called Zweig White and Associates, and a man named Mark Zweig hired me. Technically, a man named John Christ hired me, but under Mark's tutelage, John was the one that hired me and brought me on board with the company, and that was in 1997. And I was probably like about a 26-year-old, kind of still a little wet behind the ears individual, even though I'd had some experiences. But I got my first taste of the design industry, and I have had some type of involvement with it ever since. And, I always tell people never to say never, because I became an owner in Zweig White and Associates. I left when we got acquired. And then Mark Zweig and I, we've been very dear friends for more than almost 25 years. It will be 25 years this year. He asked me to come back to the company in 2013, and that's what I did. And eventually, not only did I come back to the company, but he convinced my wife and I to move from Boston, Massachusetts to Fayetteville, Arkansas. And for those watching this, if you're in the UK or in somewhere in the Eurozone, it's Boston and Northwest Arkansas couldn't be so they're so far apart, and it's like night and day. And so it was a tremendous experience for me to come here, but I've been here now 7 years and I absolutely love it. I'm no longer at Zweig Group, but I do consult with them on a regular basis. I do trainings with them. And as you mentioned, I do the Zweig Letter podcast, which was something that I encouraged Mark and Chad to do when I first came back to Zweig. And so that podcast has been running for almost 6 years now with more than 200 episodes. And it is a podcast that follows kind of loosely what happens in the Zweig Letter newsletter, which is one of the longest running newsletters in the design industry. And it's a free newsletter, so it's available to anyone. You can subscribe to it. You can just go to zweiggroup.com. But it's a very interesting newsletter for the design industry. And I've had a tremendous success with it.
Absolutely. I think that whilst we edit, it would be really worth it to mention a little bit what Zweig Group is.
Yep.
Because I'm not sure if all the listeners are familiar with the company. I certainly am. In fact, I'm kind of collaborating in some respects as well with Zweig Group, and I really love what Mark has started. Now the company is under new ownership.
Yep.
Mark Zweig, originally the owner, retired,
Mhm.
and the company basically is a consulting company for the AAC industry, to everything to do with business.
Right.
They have extensive experience with helping companies go international, and also for European companies or companies from this side of the world to actually develop their presence in America. So
Yeah.
mergent acquisitions within the architecture sector, and expansion into the American market.
Yeah.
But also services of business development, and I'm sure that a lot of other marketing related things as well.
Yeah.
They have been around for 30 years, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's actually now it was started in 1988. It's now 34 years.
There you go, 34 years, so basically my age. Incredible. And yeah, and they also organize conferences and events within America, physical, and some of them are streamed virtually. And
Yeah.
so a lot of that content and education material as well you can get on their website, as well as lots of reports related to the economy of architecture and
Yeah.
engineering and various things like that that might be relevant to you if you're a business owner in architecture. So that's just kind of a little intro, since we're talking about that business, and
Yeah.
coming back to, yeah.
I will add one thing. So they do a lot of strategic planning, which is hugely important in a design industry space. They also do ownership transition, which you and I both know. I mean, you're a little younger than me. I got you by a couple of years, but one of the biggest challenges for design professionals is not truly planning for the future, because
Mm,
you're so into the moment that you're in, the work that you're doing, which is great, but you also have to, Stephen Covey wrote a great book called The Seven Habits. And in that book, one of the habits is begin with the end in mind.
mhm,
And a lot of design firms professionals do not begin with the end in mind, meaning what is my exit strategy? How do I transfer from this company? How do I sell it? Do I give it to my employees? Do I just close up the door one day? Which actually happens in America. It happens a lot more often than you would think, that design professionals don't think about the end. And then when they get there in their 70s, and they're like, well, what do I do next? And I got to close this up, or I can't do it any longer because of health or whatever. And they've never had a plan in place. And so Zweig
mhm,
does a lot of work in that area to help firms recognize that. Plus, and you said it, I mean, there's a lot of merger and acquisition activity in the design industry. There's just a lot of consolidation, period, in business right now, but especially with design firms. So you need to know, how attractive are you for other firms? And so Zweig does all of that. The group of it at the advisory group at Zweig is I mean, they are the best that there are out there. I mean, Phil Kyle, Will Swearingen, Jamie Claire Kaiser, Chad Kleinens, the whole crew at Zweig Group really knows what they're doing in terms of helping firms navigate the waters, and making decisions as to where they want to go next with their organization. So, and I think I'm bullish on the design industry. I think there's so much work out there that regardless of where the markets are, there's so much public work. There's a lot of money out there on the street, as they say. So there's a lot of opportunity for work, for new opportunities. So firms need to constantly be thinking about what the next job is, and what's out there. What's the next piece of great work that you can do.
absolutely. And I think that it's very important to think about succession planning, because a lot of times when, in architecture specifically, when we start businesses and even well into running a business, we don't think about the exit plan like you mentioned. But what that really means is that oftentimes the business just kind of closes around us as a designer, right? Especially if
Right.
it's one of those businesses where you name it after your last name. So, people like Norman Foster did that, but he had a great succession plan in place. And it
Yeah.
is one of the best examples out there of businesses that actually can be then taken by partners and become even larger than life, larger than the one individual that created it. And
Yeah.
so we know that in architecture that is possible, but a lot of smaller players don't think about it. And if you don't think about it, by all means, you will not be building a business like that,
Hmm.
a business that can bypass you, outlive you, but think only about here and now. And that is somehow a problem of an entrepreneur, a problem of a business plan or a business development strategy, for
Yeah.
a business.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'll just add this last one. I think of like Zaha Hadid. I mean, and I know you have a personal connection with her, but I think about her when her untimely death, because I still believe she died too young. Her company's still kicking, it's still running, it's still going, and so clearly they had some type of succession plan in place. And while I know a lot of our listeners are like, "Yeah, well, you're talking about one of the best architects to ever live," I get that, but I mean, why should you be any different, right? I mean, you should plan just like somebody like Zaha Hadid planned. So
Yeah,
I think it's important.
yeah, and I think I think recently I read an article about that actually that they paid like something like 16 millions to keep the name.
Mm,
So there was something there as well where at some point for the business to remain successful, they understood the value of actually buying off the name, in order to continue. So there's definitely these aspects. Now I don't know exactly what happened there, but I do know that it's important to plan for your future succession, and companies like Zwei Group can help you with that. So let's talk a little bit about planning and basically becoming better in architecture as business owners. I know that this topic is close to your heart as you're coaching and consulting, specifically in topics of leadership. So, what are the principles there? What are we looking at when we're talking about planning and becoming better as entrepreneurs?
yeah, I think it still all boils down to being a leader, right? And I think a lot of times, many of us, myself included, and maybe you, I don't know, struggle with imposter syndrome. Even
Yeah.
if even if we're in the corner office or at the highest rung of the ladder, we still struggle with it. Where we're like, how did we get here? And what's next? And I think, if anything, we need to embrace our inner leader. I mean, everyone is called to be a leader. I don't care whether you're a draftsman or draftswoman, a draftsperson, whether you just are the Revit person in the office, or whatever your skill set is. We're all called to be leaders. And I think it's incumbent upon the leaders, the people that are running the show, to not only continue to evolve and develop themselves, but then to develop everybody else that's under them, right? And I
Mhm.
think it's hard for you to advance your organization, advance your company, without advancing yourself. And so when I do like leadership training, what's one of the first things that I talk about is, as a leader, and I say this all the time, and I sound like a broken record, you have to work yourself out of a job.
Mhm.
Not that you're going to get fired or anybody's telling or letting you go, but it's that what you're doing is, as a leader, if you develop other people to step into the role, and do the things that you do on a regular basis, you can then go off and do other things. Too often, leaders, especially in design firms, but this is a business wide issue. I mean, you see this in other industries. Too often, people hold on to all of their responsibilities instead of training other people to come in and do those things, so that they can then step out at a higher level, right? Because when you think about a leader, what does a leader do? A leader has to have a vision for where they're going to go next, whether they're in a department or whether they run the whole organization. They need to know what is the next step, or they need to be thinking about that. And in order to do that, you've got to rise above, and they say metaphorically, like in business, you're either at a 5,000-foot level, a 10,000-foot level, a 15,000-foot level. When you get up to 30,000 feet, you can see a lot more. And it's important for business leaders for business owners to figure out a way to so that they can elevate themselves up to a higher place, so they can really kind of see what the future holds for their organization and for themselves. And you can't do that if you're down in the weeds. And
Mm.
that's the biggest challenge, I mean, that I think design professionals struggle with, is that so many people are majoring in the minors instead of allowing people to develop around them and developing those individuals so that they can help you do what you do best. And then you can focus on that thing while these other individuals kind of bring up the rear and help you build whatever you're building, you know. And I think that's important. And I want to add that I don't think that there is a distinction there between, you know, if you want to be a servant leader, which I think is important. That's a style of leadership that a lot of people ascribe to, where the pyramid is inverted. So everybody's at the top. And as a leader, you're at the bottom holding everybody up and supporting them. You can look at it the same way. The idea here is that you're trying to encourage other people around you to be the best version of themselves so that they can go out and perform at the highest level possible. It's easier said than done. That's the challenge that I think a lot of design professionals struggle with, especially in the leadership space. That's like,
Mhm.
to me, it's like one of the biggest issues. People struggle with imposter syndrome. They also struggle with the ability of replicating themselves in other people.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so interesting. And then obviously with leadership specifically, it has to do with influence on others.
Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of different skills to work on there, like communications, ability to listen, influence people, and things like that.
Mhm.
Do you have some insights into that?
Yeah, you're throwing me some softballs here. So yes, I do have some insight. You bring up two things: communication and active listening. The first thing is, people, they don't care um, what you say. People only care how you make them feel, right? When you think about it. So, because we all subscribe to the same radio station. It's WIFM. What's in it for me? That's what we're all thinking about. You think about it that way, Sarah. I think about it that way. At our base human nature, we're constantly looking at what is the benefit for me. Okay,
Mhm.
when people interact with leaders and they know that those leaders don't actively listen to them, they automatically turn off their ability to truly connect with those individuals. Doesn't mean that they don't hear them. It's just that they don't hear them as intimately as they do those types of leaders that take the time to actively listen. And too often we struggle with this. And this is just in life, right? I mean, you hear a great idea, and the minute that you hear that great idea, the designer in you wants to start figuring out how would you design it. Meanwhile, that person is still talking to you, telling you about the great idea, and you've already kind of tuned them out because you've gotten just enough information to run away with it. And that's not good. Really, your whole attention should be on them to let them complete their thought or their idea, then process it. But too often, we practice a number of listening sins like daydreaming or only waiting your turn to talk. And it really impairs our ability to effectively connect with other human beings. That's the
Mm.
biggest challenge that we have when it comes to active listening. Active listening, if I succinctly put it, in most firms, when you look at the dysfunction within organizations or the layers of leadership and the dysfunctions between those layers, a lot of the root causes of the problems are the lack of or inability to actively listen. Now, the other side of that coin is communicating effectively, right? Because not only
Mhm.
do you have to actively listen, but you also have to communicate effectively. And what does that mean? That simply means that you need to consider who your audience is, because every message that comes out of your mouth isn't meant for everyone. I'm
Mm.
communicating with you differently than I might communicate with somebody else. I
Yeah.
have to always consider that. And so, Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president here in the United States, he's known for a lot of things: the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves, all that good stuff. But when Lincoln wrote, I mean, Lincoln wrote fabulous. He wrote most of his speeches, but Lincoln said, when I think about what I'm going to say or what I'm going to deliver, I spend two-thirds of the time thinking about who I'm talking to and only 1/3 of the time actually writing it out, right? And so when you think about it, it's like, okay, let me plan for how I'm going to deliver this information. Let me consider who is the audience. How are they going to react to this information? We don't take the time to craft our messages in a way that allows us to really resonate with the audience that we're talking to, right?
Hmm.
And you see it whether you're going out to answer an RFP, a request for proposal, and you go and you present to a client, and you haven't taken the time to really get to know that client. You're just, all you want to do is get all the information out there about how great your company is and all the great things that you do and the work that you've done in the past, but you haven't really taken the time to connect with that client and understand their why and why they're doing the things. I mean, I've done a number of project management trainings, and one of the things that we're always amazed at when we go in and we talk to people and we say, tell us about the biggest challenge that you had, and they'll tell us about a project that ran over budget. The scope creep was an issue, and invariably when we ask them, when you initially had your meeting with that client, did you understand why they were doing this project in the first place? Did you even ask that simple question? Why this project? Why do you want to do it this way? Well, no, we didn't talk about that. We just went right into the design scheme and focused on that. And they don't take the time to really learn why somebody is doing something.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
it's so simple. And I just but again, it's the kind of thing, Sarah, that active listening requires practice and intentionality. Being a good communicator requires practice and intentionality. And the thing that I tell everybody is that they have the opportunity to be a great listener and a great communicator. You just have to put the reps in. If you don't put the reps in, and if you aren't cognizant of what your shortcomings are to begin with, then you're going to have a hard road to go.
so interesting. And I think that it's really important to learn those things and look into it in more depth, especially as a business owner, because having a team that you manage, you have to lead and you have to take that responsibility for other people and to encourage them, and also to be the person that actually understands their needs and listens well is super important. And I think that that's a big part of sort of being a leader in a company.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And let me say something else. To your point, and the other challenge that we have, right? Like even 20 years ago, we didn't have this distraction that we have now. But this device right here, as great as it is, it's a problem. It is a problem. It's one of the reasons why, when you're present, like when I present a lot in front of audiences. I've got to come correct right away. I've got to come in like guns ablazing, because if I can't engage you from the beginning and keep you engaged, I've lost you. Because you know what? You could be watching a show. You could be listening to something with a ear pod on while you're in my session or whatever you're doing. And so I'm encouraging people to really use this for the tool that it is, but also be mindful of how it can also detract from your ability to really connect with people around you, especially
Yeah.
as it pertains to active listening, especially as it pertains to communicating effectively. And once you can kind of master that and build some habits around it, then you'll be better off. It's the reason why Sir Richard Branson never lets people come into his business meetings with a phone. You are allowed to come in with a book. Like I keep my journal here. You're allowed to come in with a book and a pen, but you can't walk into his meetings with electronics. They just don't do that.
Mhm.
And you think about, there's a lot of people that put that into practice. And I mean, it's just little things that you have to do in order to be present at all times, presence of mind and presence of body when you're meeting or connecting with someone. I have to do it now. I have to put it into practice now, where I have to shut everything else off around me, because it's Sarah Colada and Randy. That's it.
Yes.
I'm not dealing with my kids. I'm not dealing with my wife. I'm not dealing with something else at work. It's just you and I, and this is what we're talking about right now. And I
Mm.
have to give you my undivided attention. And that, I know it's reciprocated, but it's one of those things where I bet you in a lot of workplaces, if I were to ask people, poll people that report to an individual, maybe somebody watching this, whether they feel reciprocated when they communicate with you, a lot of times the answer would be what? No.
Yeah, exactly. Nowadays society.
Yeah, I mean, and again, here, let me also preface this by saying this. I don't want people to get down on themselves and say, "Yeah, I stink because I can't do this." We all have room for improvement. I'm not perfect. I'm certainly aware of what my shortcomings are when it comes to actively listening and communicating, but I work on them all the time. I'm constantly trying to be present at all times to be engaged with individuals because that does make a difference.
Absolutely. I think just learning to learn new things all the time, being open to that, important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you call yourself a serial podcaster. I love
Yeah.
that. I really
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
and I see how it comes super naturally to you. So tell me a little bit about that passion. Where did it come from? And
Mm.
uh, yeah, it's a big part of your life
It
having
is.
a
It
podcast.
is. Yeah, it is. I thank you for asking me. It is a passion of mine. It's something that I would do whether people paid me for it or not. I love telling stories. I got involved with podcasting in 2009. At this date, I've done more than 800 podcast episodes for a variety of purposes, but it's just something that is near and dear to my heart, and I enjoy it. I love telling stories. I love the process of just getting on the mic and sharing or having something come out of my mouth and being able to create some tangible ideas that I can then share with the world. And the thing about podcasting that I really enjoy is you never know who's listening. And that is it's very powerful to me because you're impacting people that you have no idea that you're impacting. And I have learned that in the 6 years that I've done the Zweigletter podcast. I've learned that in the almost 3 years that I've done my own personal podcast called I Am Northwest Arkansas, which is a location-based podcast here in Northwest Arkansas. And then I've learned it when I've interacted and worked with clients where I've gone into firms and helped them develop a podcast so that they could extend their brand, because that podcasting allows you to tell a story. You control the narrative, and it's one way for you to extend the brand of your organization, to extend your own personal brand, because we all have a personal brand. Sarah, you have a personal brand. I have a
Yeah.
personal brand. And so podcasting gives us that platform to extend our personal brand, whether we're trying to extend it for our own personal purpose or whether we want to extend it to exchange ideas about something that we feel passionate about. Right. And so I think about like what you're doing and how you're exchanging ideas with people about how, uh, design professionals don't have to feel like they're in a rut and that they do have options, and that, having a side hustle is okay, which was, that was heresy talk back in the day. It was like, no, you work at one place and that's where you work and that's how it is. There was never, people would like, no, you can't, we used to call it moonlighting. You can't do that. And some people had moonlighting clauses or provisions in their some people had moonlighting clauses or provisions in their contracts when they were hired. And so it's just that's just the way it is. And so, that is something that I tell people about all the time, but you are passionate about that and you talk about it and it comes out and it resonates. And then you're resonating with a bunch of people that are probably thinking the same thing. You just put language to their ideas that are in their head. And that's
Mm.
what that to me is why podcasting is such a powerful platform or medium, because you allow people to get between these two ears right here. And this is probably one of the most sacred places that anybody can be.
I love that. It's true. And I think that, with podcasting specifically, it's sort of a thing that you do when you relax, whether it's when you go for a walk with a dog or you go to the gym. That's normally where people listen to podcasts or whilst driving. So it's sort of, it's that, it's that those words that fill in the silence that normally, maybe we would listen to music or something like that, but we're looking for inspiration. And so there isn't, it's not a time specifically to learn. It's not a time to overpower your brain and have to think really hard. It's a time to relax and enjoy whatever's happening. And I think that and there's that level of sort of entertainment mixed with a bit of education and inspiration is a fabulous way to spend time. And I am just like you. I honestly would be doing this for free. I would be doing this anytime, day or night. I love it. And a big part of continuing basically to podcast is to meet people, and I'm kind of doing it for myself. Someone said it recently on my podcast that I'm probably podcasting for myself. I feel like that I'm doing it for me.
No, that's how I roll. I mean, everything, a lot of it, I have learned so much doing the podcast for Zweig Group and the Zweig Letter podcast. And and then for the podcast that I've created here called I Am Northwest Arkansas, for anybody that wants to listen to it, you can just go to iamnorthwestarkansas.com. I've created a podcast for Encourage, Build, Grow. I've talked a little bit about leadership. I'm in the process of I have mothballed that podcast because I'm going to pivot and change some of the things I talk about in that podcast. I just haven't gotten around to it because I've been so busy helping other clients get their podcasts off the ground. But as I have convinced more and more firms to pick up mic, no pun intended, and to actually do a podcast, they're coming back to me now saying, wow, this is such a great idea. I don't know why we didn't do this sooner. And I'm like, every company has has a reason to do a podcast. And I simply say it like this: you may never share it with the world, but if nothing else, it is a great tool for internal morale. It's a great tool to continue to advance your brand internally. It's a great tool for personal and professional development. It is a great tool to just hear the founder stories of the people that started your organization, so that if I work for a place, I mean, I can tell you Mark Zweig's story from day one. I know it like the back of my heart. I know Chad's story. You have to know the place that you work at. You need to know that story. And I think it's incumbent upon you, if you work someplace, to understand why, the why behind why your company does what it does and what separates it. Because invariably, you're going to be in front of people where you may be asked the question, well, why should we go with you, or why should we work with you? Well, you need to be able to, off the tip of your tongue, share in a succinct way why your company is different. And a lot
Mhm.
of companies, have never trained their people to professionally do that. I mean, to do that in a way where you walk away saying, wow, okay, we need to really consider this company. Like I tell people all the time, if you were stuck in an elevator for 30 seconds with the greatest potential client that you could ever work with, would you be fumbling around with your words to tell them why they should consider working with you? How would you engage them? Most of the times people would not know what to say.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, there's a famous movie here in the United States, and I shudder to mention this because it's called Glengarry Glen Ross. It's about car salesmen, and there's a scene in the movie where Alec Baldwin is teaching the guys how to sell, and one of the things he says is you got to take the ABC method. Always be closing. Now, I'm not a hardcore salesperson. I do like sales. I've had success from a sales perspective, but I've told people to have that idea or mindset in there, so that if an opportunity presents itself, you need to be able to close somebody and say, hey, here are 3 tangible reasons why you need to come work with us. And that could be because you might be recruiting somebody to come work at your firm, which recruiting in the United States for design firms is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And I don't know in the Eurozone if it's the same issue, but
Yeah.
finding good engineers and architects is not easy. So
Mm.
if you meet somebody and they work for the competition, you need to be able to tell them in 2 seconds why they should consider coming to work at your firm. If you
Yeah.
can't do that, then you're missing out. Just like you need to be able to engage a potential client or a potential stakeholder in the community that you work in, you need to be able to engage that potential person that might come alongside you and help you grow your business. And if you
Mhm.
can't do that, then I mean, you need to work on that. That's all.
Absolutely.
No
Yeah, it's
judgment. No judgment.
I think it's really important. And what's really interesting is that nowadays we don't actually have to, if we are business owners, we don't have to also be the podcasters. We can hire people to do it for us. And that's great, you know, finding an awesome person that really loves doing it, that can help you develop that
Yeah.
side of the business. It's amazing.
I want to tease something, and I'm just putting it out there because I'm working on it now. But I am putting a course together. Part of it is going to be free, just to kind of give people the tent poles of what it would mean to do a podcast for your organization. And I'm going to have a course that you can get where people can go through the process of, what the podcast, how to get a podcast off the ground for your organization, how to think about it, right? That's the thing that I think a lot of people struggle with. I don't know what to say, or we're going to run out of content and run out of information after 3 episodes. It's not true.
Yeah.
I just sat down with a firm up in Connecticut. We did 12 episodes with them over 2 days. They had so much material that the information was outstanding. And every company has 12 episodes in them, right?
Mm,
And again, and I'll kind of put this out there, and this is what I train and teach people, is that don't think of it as, oh, I'm putting a podcast out every week. I mean, what you do and what I do, there is some synchronicity there in constantly putting out new content and material. But for a company, you may just need to tell your story once and memorialize it in a podcast, and then you have it, right?
yeah.
And you can share it with your people internally, you can share it with potential clients, you can do a number of things.
Mm.
And I think it's important for you to understand that. And so that's what I'm encouraging people to think about when it comes to um podcasting. Don't figure out, don't think, oh my gosh, I've got to be on Apple's top 10 list, I've got to put a podcast out every week. That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Mhm.
saying, let's curate and tell your story, memorialize it in a way, in a fashion that you can share it. Like, I have a client that has 1,600 employees all over the country, and they share that podcast out. Everybody listens to it, and it's great, and it's just for them. But everybody listens to it. They get to learn about the different lines of business in the company, and they really benefit from having that type of information accessible to them.
Amazing. I love that. I really do. So tell me, Randy, when people want to find out more or maybe subscribe to your newsletter, where whenever the course is ready, they can be first to grab, where should
Yes.
they go?
Yes. So they can do two things. They can connect with me on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I heard you on Sarah's show. Love to learn more about the podcasting program. And I'm just Randy Wilburn on LinkedIn. And then they can also go to encouragebuildgrow.com and sign up for my newsletter. Just sign up for my mailing list. There's a clear thing right there. Just join my mailing list, and I'll send that information out. I would have to say that, I have been so caught up in podcasting that I haven't taken the time to build out some other things that I have within the Encourage, Build, Grow organization. So I apologize about that. But the thing about it is, I'm so passionate about podcasting, and that's the thing that I really enjoy doing. And I'm working on some of these other things to round it out so that there's a clear place to go. But yeah, but just bear with me. But yeah, if you're interested in this, what I said to you today resonates, and what Sarah and I talked about resonates, definitely reach out and connect with me. And if nothing else, if I can just give you some encouragement or advice or ideas, I'm happy to do that, because that's the one thing that I've loved about the design industry. And Chad Kleinens has always succinctly put it: a rising tide lifts all ships. That's not his quote. JFK actually originally, I think, penned that quote back in the 60s, but it is true. And in the design industry, we need to continue to buff each other up, pull each other up. And that's why, like, with Zwei Group's whole mandate of elevate AEC and elevate her, and all the ways that they're trying to elevate the design industry, I'm doing the same thing from a podcasting perspective. I want to elevate your story on a platform that the world needs to hear your story. Period. Full stop. That's it. I mean, there's no and or buts. The world needs to hear your story. Whatever that is, you need to tell it. And you need to be comfortable telling it. And if you're not, you need to get with somebody that will help coach you through the process so that you can get your story out there, because it needs to be memorialized.
Absolutely, I agree. And it's great that you're doing this and you're giving people an opportunity to tell their stories, and companies as well. other businesses. So I'll definitely be subscribing to the newsletter. Thank you so much for your time, Randy. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. Thanks for everyone who tuned in and listened to us. And we'll see you all really soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Great to see you. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you.
Pleasure.